She grew up in a white factory town where the Klan still gathered at the drive-in. Her mother couldn't swim in the white swimming pool, and she tried for years to get a job at McDonald's, but there was too much competition. Guess she had to become a playwright. Welcome to Women in Theater. I'm Linda Weiner, theater critic of Newsday, and our guest is Kia Corthron, who writes tough, issue-oriented, poetic dramas about blue-collar black people, and mainstream theaters line up to commission more. You really don't mind being called issue-oriented, right? I mean, that's really where you start.
No, I don't. And that was my favorite bio I ever had in my life.
You may have it. It'll be right there forever.
I couldn't imagine you knew that stuff.
Thank you. So, Dissent is Patriotic is on your, on your sweatshirt. Let's make sure everyone sees that first. Your plays are about social issues, and in fact, you start out with a social issue.
Yeah.
Which is completely bizarre for playwrights, right?
Unusual. I don't know if I would say bizarre.
Okay.
For me, it's completely usual.
Yeah.
I actually went to graduate school at Columbia, and Howard Stein was the teacher there when I was there. I started like '88 was the first year. And I remember one day, the 20-some artists in my class, we were in the room with Howard, and I remember he was sort of talking about different people's work, different students' work, and he mentioned something about Kia being the person who deals with political issues, the political artist.
Is he the one who said you're an anomaly? Or was that a
well,
different? Yeah, okay,
I
never
may
mind.
have written about this.
I don't mean to.
Yeah, that was
yes.
actually the first time I realized I was an anomaly. It was just that moment. I think I remember like looking around at the other students, and suddenly it occurred to me, oh, I guess I hadn't heard political stuff from them, because for me it comes so naturally. It was almost as if I assumed everybody else did that, even though there wasn't really evidence of that necessarily.
Well, I think maybe that we think that the creative process starts somewhere with a little germ of something and then ends up to be a play about toxic waste. Do you know? But it's Ibsen, isn't it?
It's the only way that it's completely where all my work starts from.
And yet, unlike a couple of other playwrights who I won't name here, whose plays can be summed up as, this is the play about the girl gang. This is the play about the black on black violence in the cops, which are two of your plays. Which one is Force Continuum, the cop play, and the other is Breath Boom, my favorite.
Thank you.
When other playwrights seem to set out to have an issue, it becomes a play about that issue only. And yours are so stylized, and you know that the language is so interesting and unpredictable, that there's this sort of action-packed realism going on with extremely stylized language, which sort of justifies it as a play, as opposed to a movie about sexual harassment. Do you think you should be writing movies? I don't.
Well, no, not
These are
necessarily.
plays.
I mean, the funny thing is, there's a side of me sometimes that thinks almost guiltily that maybe I should be doing film or TV because I could get my political message to a wider audience. But I'm so much oriented, which is not to say I wouldn't do that, but I'm so much more oriented to the stage. And partly with the way I play with language is I like the audience not to know from scene to scene or sentence to sentence or word to word exactly what's coming next. Even the next word, they shouldn't be able to predict it. And in that way...
Which is what's so exciting, part of what's so exciting about it.
Yeah, and that way their ears are always pricked, they're paying attention, and they're an active participant in a way that television and film viewers aren't so active. It's not live and happening before them. And so
Yeah, two of your sentences from Breath Boom, and I think people would be out making sandwiches. Or they'd be with the machine. It'd be hard to have that on TV. It's a realistic medium. But you did start out. You were at the University of Maryland, weren't you? Actually studying to be a screenwriter?
I was interested in that at that time when I was younger, partly because I grew up in this small working class, 97% white town, and there wasn't much theater going on there. So I was more oriented toward film, and or I wasn't even sure if it may have been fiction. I couldn't quite decide where I wanted to go. And it wasn't until I took a class, a playwriting class, and it had to do with how the class was affected by the play and the piece that I'd written. And everybody, I remember that we all had to do these scenes, and we were all these infant playwrights. Nobody knew what a 15-minute scene was. So everybody else was 5 minutes, and mine went on for 30 minutes. It was actually about a Vietnam vet coming home from the war, and his father had died while he was away, and his sister. This was my very first play, one of the X plays, and it's his reunion with his sister and the tensions between them. And I remember there was just a couple of actually friends of mine who were engineering students from my dorm, because I was too shy to go to the theater department. And as it turned out, the boy who was the main character had done theater in high school, but I hadn't realized that. And sometimes I wonder if he hadn't, and he'd been terrible, if that would have changed my life. But as it turned out, he was really good. It really affected the class. And I remember when the lights came up and there was this silence, which completely stunned me, because I thought everyone was bored. But that actually, and I heard this person sighing, but as it turned out, she was crying. I thought everyone was bored, and it was quite the opposite. And instead of jumping in and with all sorts of compliments, as undergrads can do, nobody had anything to say. And when they finally said things, it would be one-word comments like poignant. And I remember that because I had, through school, it always been sort of the star of my writing classes in whatever medium it was. But the fact that for the first time, I wasn't getting all this flattery, but instead had affected this audience, so they were speechless, actually meant more to me than all the flattery in all those years. And I was aware that this is one singular moment with these actors and this audience on this afternoon that could never be repeated. And I was so excited by the immediacy of that theater that's why I've been writing for the theater since.
So that was it, and then you went to Columbia. You got an MFA.
Yeah.
And then how did the Royal Court in London find you and start commissioning work?
Well,
before anybody here had even heard your name.
Well, I think partly I had a I think they had heard of me a little bit from the States. I think when I had a fellowship at Manhattan Theater Club, it seems like one of the lit managers there had mentioned it to someone there. It was actually my agent at that time, Sarah Jane Lee, who incidentally is British, went there once on a visit, came back, said the Royal Court would be calling, and I got the commission, and that actually led to me writing Breath Boom. Yeah, and interestingly, before that was produced, the Donmar Warehouse did a little festival with about 7 to 10 performances of American plays, with 3 American plays. So actually, as it turned out, surprisingly, the Donmar was the first production I got in England of a play of mine called Splash Hatch on the E Going Down, which actually had been done some in the States before.
Splash Hatch on the E Going Down, is that the environmental?
Yes.
Environmental racism.
It's the environmental racism and teen pregnancy play.
Teen pregnancy, yeah, right.
I actually do that too.
in made-up language. Could you talk a little bit about that play? The genesis?
Yeah, that was kind of a fun play because I've actually been really fortunate that I've been commissioned a lot by theaters, and whenever, with rare instances, probably the only instance, well, actually I should say 2 now, where usually they give me the money, they know what I write about, I write whatever I want. the two exceptions would be the children's theater, but only because I hadn't written for children before. And I actually wanted that in Minneapolis.
Oh,
and
that's such a good theater.
yeah. And I actually wanted them to throw out ideas, because I wanted to know what children in the Twin Cities will be interested in. And Peter Brocious there had threw out a lot of ideas. And the one I actually latched onto, because I'd been wanting to write an immigrants play for a while, was that there had been a huge Somali immigrant population, refugee population. So I wrote a play about the relationship between a 12-year-old African-American girl and a 12-year-old Somali girl, because there have also been tensions between the communities. So exception of that one, and my most recent play, which was with the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis. Also, Minneapolis got this huge grant. They selected 9 American playwrights to go wherever we wanted in the world and to write a play inspired by the experience. So I went to Liberia. I mean, again, I could write whatever I wanted, but obviously it was going to be about Liberia. But besides those, Splash Hatch was like my one non-commissioned play. And it was sort of, there was something fun. I don't even know why I felt that way, but suddenly I felt this freedom, even though I feel very fortunate to be commissioned. Like suddenly I felt like it's not commissioned, it's a free play, a free agent play in a weird way. And I went in this retreat, this women writers retreat called Hedgebrook, north of Seattle. And I was there for a month in this beautiful place on this island. And I was in this little cottage, and these wonderful, I was the only playwright, these other wonderful women writers. And I had planned to write this play anyway, but there was something about being in this extraordinarily beautiful environment and thinking about what we can all lose that really influenced writing that play about environmental racism as well. I remember actually one of the women there said a comment to me, because I kept reading, we were sharing parts of what we were writing, and I was reading that, and that meant a lot to me, because I always say I feel that I'm a success as a writer if at least one audience member leaves thinking differently than when they walked in. And she, having just heard me read from the play, told me she lives in Boston. She grew up in Maine, a white woman with small children at that time. And she was saying, a wonderful essayist too, but she said when she sees urban young pregnant women, that she would think differently than she had before, just from that experience. So it was a wonderful experience.
When you were growing up in Cumberland,
Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Which is this, it's really in the South. You can walk to Virginia?
To West Virginia.
To West Virginia, okay.
Yeah. And because it's Western Maryland, it's the skinny little part of Maryland, and it's a valley of the Appalachians. And it was a big factory town, but when I was just a kid, all the factories closed. Practically the only thing going on was the paper mill where my father worked. But that meant that all those workers were really abused, because they were always threatened with their jobs, because everybody was out of work. So it was a very depressed area. And having gone the way of many small towns now, there's a prison that they built a few years ago, and a big Walmart that's taken, closed the other businesses. So it's very, unfortunately, typical of the small town landscape of.
Yeah. So this sort of sadness and sense of injustice was, although you look like an extremely happy person, but see, it's marrow deep, right? When you grow up like that, and your dad died. Yeah. In the factory.
He was working. It was actually an aneurysm, but he was working there when he died.
Young, 51.
51, yeah.
So, and you're surrounded by girls who are possibly, racist, who aren't really talking to you about what they're really talking to one another about. How'd you get out?
Well, actually, the first couple of years of college, I just went to a small state school, not far from where I grew up, even further up in the mountains. And then I went to the University of Maryland the last couple of years. So that's an urban area, it's near DC. Yeah. And I worked there a few years. Interestingly, right after school, I had no money. So I had this college degree, and I was working in the layaway department of this department store. And actually, I'll never forget it because a woman, a white woman who was, a grown-up. I was, a 22-year-old or 23 out of college. She was a complete grown-up with probably kids. Were hired on the same day. And I'll never forget, this was not Walmart, by the way. This is pre-Walmart, before Walmart came there. But the day we were hired, we had to watch a video, and it showed a white man who was the manager, and most of the managers were white men where I worked anyway, and a white woman who was hired that day, and he was taking her around and showing her the store, and she was very happy, and he was very happy. And then all of a sudden, she got this worried look on her face, and she said, "Oh, there aren't any unions here, are there?" And he said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about that." And it's just so ludicrous. I laughed out loud. I turned to the woman, because we were the only ones in the room, right? I knew someone was spying on us, but in the moment, we were the only ones in the room. And I laughed. This was ridiculous. And I remember that woman did not crack a smile. She stared straight at the screen, because even if she found it ludicrous, she was not going to risk this job, because nobody had jobs.
So you have this mission, which often doesn't make for good art. But in your case, it does.
Yeah.
And you're also unafraid to, if someone says that your plays are didactic, you think that's fine. I've read. It's not a word you mind.
Yeah, I actually, and I don't see it much because I don't read
You don't
reviews.
read. Yeah, it's a smart woman.
But I may have heard such a thing.
Yeah.
I would actually rather err on the side of being a little didactic than err on the side of having not really said anything, not challenged the status quo at all. I mean, I don't mean to sound really lofty about that, but for me, some people think that seems a clash with art, that for politics that it is some sort of clash, and for me it's so tied into it, because if we're not saying anything about our social welfare as a society, then it may be beautiful and rosy and enjoyable, but I don't know how long it's going to stay with me. And if it doesn't stay with me, I don't know that I can call it art.
And you do a lot of research. And yet they don't sound like cultural tourist plays, which sometimes
while I'm doing initial rewrites and stuff, sometimes it's like, okay, maybe a little less facts. That's always kind of the big thing, is because there's so much research in deciding what goes and stays.
They are stuffed with information.
Yeah.
But not the kind of thing where it's like, now I'm going to tell you this is going to be good for you. Although, obviously, you do care if they're good for us. So there are 3 prison plays.
Yeah, Breath. Well, the 2 central ones are Cage Rhythm, which is women's prison, and Life by Asphyxiation, which takes place on death row. But there are also scenes in Breath Boom in prison. Yeah.
Right. And you do this by going and watching, reading, thinking. I mean, how much is imagination?
I've read a lot, but I've taught playwriting in prisons here and there. I mean, the most fruitful time was actually when I had my NEA with Manhattan Theater Club, and I went to Rosewood, is that the name of it? It's Rose something, because I remember when I made the little program, it had a little rose on it. Anyway, it's the high school for incarcerated girls on
Rikers.
Yes. Yeah, it was just 1 week. Apparently they had this program in place where they were with the young men all the time, and the boys, but for some reason they had trouble with the girls from week to week having the same student come back twice. So the way we did this was, it was 1 week, just Monday through Friday, but it was all day. Instead of just an hour once a week, it became all day. So it was a remarkable experience. I mean, I don't know that I could do it full time and ever get any writing done, because while I was into it, I really loved those girls and I was totally focused. That's all I did. And so I wasn't doing any writing or thinking about writing, but it was also somewhat You know, there were certainly lots of heartbreaking moments. Like the one corrections officer who was, first of all, shockingly, because I saw the whole women's prison, they were part of the whole women's prison, so I saw like it's shockingly that 99.9% of the people were Black or Black Latino. I mean, it's Latina. Mm-hmm. It's, we know that there's an overwhelming prejudice, mm-hmm. but I didn't realize it was that overwhelming, that it was hard to even see a white face in there. But there was a man who the girls really liked, mm-hmm. And he seemed like a very nice man, a corrections officer, and seemed to care about them. But then he made some remark to one of my actors about, they'll always be in trouble. They'll always be coming back here. Wow. And I was thinking, this is the person that comes close to believing in them.
But how did you research for your Dolly the Sheep play?
Okay. Slide Glide, The Slippery Slope, which was, I was really aware of human cloning and genetic engineering. And so that was a little more than socio-political, more socio-moral in the issues in that play. Although, I mean, stuff comes up about sickle cell anemia, and I mean, that was a lot of books I was reading because there's so much information on that subject.
So it's all like going to school, huh? It's good. It's good you liked school, right? Because it is like going to school.
Yeah.
Seeking the Genesis was your first that was your play at Manhattan Theater Club in 97. And again, that was about, is there a violence gene?
Yeah, right? The Violence Initiative is what that was called, and that was something that I'd read these books by a psychiatrist named Dr. Peter Breggin, who lives in D.C., and interestingly is very anti-drugs. He's written lots of books about this, especially drugging children. So he talked about the possibility and how that's happened before in government and what was going on at that time of considering, I mean, I actually sort of dealt with two things. One was Ritalin in small children, and one was drugging troubled teens, and the connection between them. And if we drug them early, then they won't cause trouble later.
What about black people infiltrating the KKK?
Let's Wake Up Blue, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Actually, that I wrote the first drafts back in while I was still in Columbia, and that started when I read this article about, I guess it happened in like the late 80s, about this woman who had sued the Ku Klux Klan, it was somewhere in the South, because they had murdered her son. He was 19 years old, and they had kidnapped him and murdered him. And what happened, interestingly, was she sued that local Klan establishment for like $7 million, and she won the lawsuit.
I'm so sad that we're running out of time, so I want to find out. Do you ever run out of ideas, or you just turn on the radio?
Yeah.
And can you see a difference between your plays and what is the kind of political theater known as agitprop?
I see a big difference, but that's not to say that I begrudge agitprop. It has its place.
Differentiate.
But because agitprop, I think, is completely intellectual and about the facts, whereas with my plays, I start out with the political, but then it grows into something more an emotional attachment, and so I think simply agitprop sort of starts with the brain, and I think mine start with the heart, and they have that intellectual side, but it has that.
Do you have things like eating away at you right now that you're writing?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm
You don't have to talk about it at all. One of the things watching your plays, it was a feeling that in no way are your plays like August Wilson plays, except that you both like ensembles. But it's that feeling of, oh my God, look at that talent pool. I've never seen any of those people. They're so good.
Oh, the actors. Yeah.
And then you don't see them again. You know, for the August Wilson play, then you don't see them again until another August Wilson play comes along.
Yeah.
And with yours, I started to identify actors that I had never seen that are just so good.
Yeah.
So you have to write so they can have careers.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like, for example, with the cloning play, I mean, sometimes people say, actually even an actor told me, actually a play that I wrote about landmines, that he said that he was surprised that, he said they didn't feel like a Black play. And for him, it's because I think unless, and actually I think for many people who are Black, that unless it's a specifically Black issue, that you assume that that white is the neutral, you know, if you're going to take an issue that is neutral. And my feeling is if it's the media, the play just did it in Louisville, or landmines, or genetic engineering, that all affect all of us. And so why can't the characters happen to be Black?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why can't the journalists be Black in a play about the media?
Yes, of course. And you live in Harlem, and you, I'm just so happy that you're here. I know that, do you have like heroes in terms of style? Because I know that the Goodman Theater once said that they were commissioning you because you wrote like, that we couldn't compare her to anyone else.
Oh, no. That's interesting.
So I think, well, do you compare yourself to, I mean, is there people you look to in terms of, not just that you've respected them, but somehow that they formed your work in any way?
Yeah, you know, someone I would say who I didn't even realize this till much later, after I was already writing, because I'd read his plays as an undergrad before I started writing, and loved them, but didn't realize that I was sort of writing in a similar vein, was actually David Rabe in some of those. Yeah, because he's very political, and the language is very heightened.
That white guy. Yeah.
I'm a big fan.
Kia Corthron, I can't believe it. Time is up, and I thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us on behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women. I'm Linda Weiner, and this has been Women in Theater.